In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is episode 114, if I'm counting accurately. Hopefully I haven't skipped any episodes here. Last week we had an excellent episode with Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity, where we talked about street epistemology, or what has come to be known as a sort of atheistic evangelism, for some people trying to bring enough doubt to a person's faith so that they would give up Christian belief. And this is a movement that's been growing, and so we wanted to share with you some thoughts and insights on how Christians should respond to these ideas. And so if you haven't had the opportunity yet to listen to that episode, I want to encourage you to do so. You can go to our website, veracityhill.com, and click on the recent post there. On today's episode, we're talking about Scientism, which is an interesting form of epistemology, a way of studying knowledge, a viewpoint or a framework of interpreting the world. But before we get into that, I've got just one announcement here. We are 2 weeks away from the annual Defenders Conference 2018, and this year's theme is on divine genocide. Genocide in Scripture? Did God really command the Israelites to kill even the women and the children? We're bringing in 4 different Christian perspectives on how to interpret these various passages. John Walton, Paul Copan, Clay Jones, and Kenton Sparks. It's going to be a great opportunity for you to come and listen in on these viewpoints, to become aware of these different ways of understanding these passages. I know when I am talking to people about apologetics, and I might be evangelizing to someone, they might raise an objection. I like to have multiple answers ready, because even if that person doesn't agree with me on how to solve that quandary, they might be sympathetic to an alternative explanation. And so by providing multiple answers, you can help to tear down that obstacle to faith in Christ. So I want to encourage you, wherever you live, we have a family from Oklahoma coming, a couple from Virginia, a fellow from Florida, 6 high school teachers from Louisville, Kentucky. People from all over the country are coming for this event. I wanted to encourage you, if you've got a free weekend here in 2 weeks, come join us in Chicagoland at the Christian Church of Clarendon Hills. It's going to be a great opportunity, a lot of fun, and you'll meet other people who are interested in apologetics as well. So if you want to learn more information about that, you can go to thedefendersconference.com, and you can see breakout sessions and register online as well. Walk-ins are welcome, but it'll be a bit more convenient for you and for us if you can sign up online beforehand. All right, on today's show, we're talking about Scientism and what that is, and we have invited the distinguished professor of philosophy at the Talbot School of Theology, which is located at my alma mater, Biola University in La Mirada, California. He is none other than Dr. J.P. Moreland. J.P., thank you so much for joining us on our program today.
Well, it's a delight to be with you.
Thanks. And so you you've got great experience, not just in Christian academia, but in Christian ministry yourselves. And lest I explain to people your background, why don't you tell us a little bit about the things you've done in Christian ministry?
Well, I came to Christ at the University of Missouri while I was a physical chemistry major in 1968, in the midst of the 60s. So I joined the staff of what's now called Crew, and was on staff from 70 to 75, went to Dallas Seminary for 4 years, joined staff again and taught at their headquarters seminary, and then did my MA and PhD in philosophy at University of California and then USC. Planted 2 churches, planted 2 Campus Crusade works, and I have taught at Biola University for 29 years. And so that's just enough to start getting an education.
That's great and wonderful. Of course, not just from your sort of ministry work, but also your job as a professor. That in itself is a ministry, I know, to many students. Sadly, I didn't have the opportunity to have you as a professor when I was there. One of the things I wish I did have, but I know you've been a blessing to many people there. Now, you've also published many works, some of which just come to mind. Love God with Your Mind. We've got Scaling the Secular City, Kingdom Triangle. Of course, some more, even more philosophical works on substance dualism, which is one of your areas of specialty. But tell us a little bit about this recent work that's forthcoming called Scientism and Secularism.
Well, Kurt, I was very discouraged and concerned that in a recent Barna poll, the 6 reasons people are leaving Christianity and the church are all, believe it or not, intellectual reasons. And one of the main reasons is that the church is not helping people interact with science. So I have seen a false and a wicked ideology called scientism affect people's confidence in Christ or in the Bible, and it's affected people from coming to Jesus in the first place. And so Crossway Publishers asked me to write a book on the subject. And so I did. It's out now. It's called Scientism and Secularism, Learning to Defeat a Dangerous Ideology. And so that's the concern that I've had. And the book is written for a lay audience, especially homeschool parents and Christian school teachers. But we have got to be updated about what this is, Kurt, and what's wrong with it.
Now, many of your I wanted to ask you, I mean, what's it like having the gift of prophecy? Because some of your books really have anticipated social movements that have come. And maybe it's just been a testament to your place in academia. You've seen the philosophical work out there, and you know it's going to come. It's going to come to the general audience sooner or later.
Well, you're absolutely right. That's why shows like yours and books like the one I just did are so important, so that Christians can be informed and given eyes to see and things to say to people when these trends happen.
And so the trend to scientism has been happening recently. I could think of the physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's been a big scientismist, I guess, if you could call it that. Okay, but before we keep talking about it, I guess we should ask this question. What is scientism, and why does it matter?
Good question. Scientism is basically the view that the only way we can know reality is through the methods of the hard sciences. So if you can prove something in physics and chemistry or neuroscience or biology, then you can know it. But if you can't prove it and test it in the lab empirically, then it's just personal opinion. And what this means is all the things that matter to us. Is there a God? Do I have a soul? Is there anything morally right? Is there life after death? What should the state be doing, and how should I vote? These are all questions that scientism would say is just an expression of personal emotion and feeling. And so that means that Christian claims, ethical claims are your opinion, and nobody can know who's right or wrong. And so that marginalizes Christianity.
And there are ways in which the growing movement of scientism has affected, first, the Christian church. It's sort of found its way, seeped its way in. What are some of the ways that it's affected the Christian church?
Well, one of the ways that scientism has affected the discipleship, parenting, and the church is that Christians have retreated from believing that faith is confidence based on what we know or based on what we have reason to believe, in which case reason supports faith, to a view that faith is just the choice to believe something without any rational considerations at all. It's an absolutely blind step in the dark. And this has been a way for Christians to protect themselves, because if reason is on the side of the atheists, and if science keeps showing that certain things the Bible appears to teach is not true, well, then the best thing to do, of course, isn't it, is to just retreat and say, well, we don't care about that stuff. We know all this is true because we choose to believe it, and that's a protective movement. The problem is when kids get away from their families and get away from even good churches and go to college, it's not enough. And they get picked off like shooting fish in a barrel. And scientism tells us that what we've been taught in Scripture is something no one can know is true. And so the church has abandoned teaching people why they believe what they believe, and thinks that if you just teach people what to believe and have them accept it by faith, then that will grow to a maturing believer. But it just doesn't work, especially these days.
Before I forget, compliments of Crossway, we are giving away a copy of your book. And so for those that are tuning in now, or you're watching this video or listening via podcast, I want to encourage you to go ahead and share the video here on Facebook. So if you are listening on podcast, hop on your app, go to Veracity Hill on Facebook, and share this video and comment below. And we will select someone later this week to receive a free copy of Dr. Moreland's now published book. I guess maybe it's just come out. So it's a wonderful opportunity for you to get your hands on this copy. And again, thank you to Crossway, the publisher here, for that opportunity. Okay, Dr. Moreland, so we talked about here how scientism has sort of crept into the church, and it's malformed the views that people in general have about what faith even means. But how has scientism affected the universities? How has it gone into the academia, into the ivory tower, and changed the way that professors have viewed their students, viewed the pursuit of knowledge, etc.?
Well, in the universities, it is widely thought that the only disciplines that really give knowledge of reality are the sciences, especially the hard sciences. What that means is that the soft sciences, psychology and sociology, all the humanities, my goodness, certainly theological claims, are just kind of postmodern. They're not making statements that are true. They're just, and certainly they're not making statements that anybody could know are true. And so students are coming to believe that religious claims and ethical claims are things that you can believe them for yourself, but if you try to enforce them on other people, you're trying to legislate morality. Whereas nobody would say you're legislating chemistry if you say there's hydrochloric acid in that beaker, because we take ourselves to know that that's true, but we don't take ourselves to know that God exists or abortion's wrong and things of that sort. One other thing on this, if I may. Knowledge is what gives people the authority to act and speak in public. It's because dentists have a certain branch of knowledge, or lawyers have a certain domain of knowledge, that we give them the right. We give them the right to pull teeth or to write contracts because they have a certain body of knowledge. That also gives people confidence to speak boldly about something that they actually know about. Now, if my dentist said to me, you know, I don't have any clue about molars. I don't know anything about them, but I have to tell you, I have some very passionate feelings about molars, and I really believe them deeply by faith. And in fact, I hired a guy to develop some CDs, and I listen to molar music in my car and sing to it. May I fix your molars? Well, he's not getting a mile from my mouth. And so, you see, if Christianity is not a source of knowledge of reality, then it isn't to be taken seriously. And so scientism, as I state clearly in my book, Scientism and Secularism, scientism eventually leads to a secular society. We've already seen it in Europe, and to the erosion of boldness and confidence among our young people and even adults that Christianity is something you could really take seriously, because we can't really know whether it's true.
That does seem one way to, let's say if you're a non-believer, it seems like one way to avoid some of the things that Christians say about human nature.
Absolutely.
So for example, if Christianity is true, it's going to require people to repent from their sins in all those ways. And so if you could undercut the truth of Christianity by just saying, well, we can't know, religious claims are true or ethical claims are true, then, that's one way for non-believers to sort of get out of that. The trouble is, if in fact there is value to the truth claims, then, that might be the hound of heaven coming for that person.
Absolutely. And the real issue now is, even if the claims of Christianity are true, if nobody can know whether they're true, then you can't get up and say, well, Jesus died for our sins, and that's the truth. Because somebody's going to say, well, that's just a blind faith statement. Even if it is true, you have absolutely no grounds for that, because you can't prove it scientifically. Can you prove that scientifically? No. Well, then you can't know it, can you? You got to be able to prove it scientifically. You ever heard that? Boy, I have.
Yeah, right. Okay, so what are some of the problems that are facing scientism? So maybe I should clarify. What are some of the intellectual problems with scientism?
Well, it has three huge problems. First of all, it's self-refuting. Now, something is self-refuting if it makes itself false. So, for example, the statement, no statements are longer than 3 words, is itself longer than 3 words, and so it makes itself false. If I say there are no truths, then I'm offering that as a truth, and the statement makes itself false. Now, the statement, the only thing that can be true or known to be true is what can be proven in the hard sciences, cannot itself be proven in the hard sciences. It is actually a statement of philosophy about science. It is not a statement of science, like water is H2O or the continents float on plates or something of that sort. So it's self-refuting and can't possibly be true. Secondly, scientism does not allow for the stating and the defending of the assumptions of science themselves. Science makes a whole host of assumptions. For example, it assumes a certain view of what truth is. It assumes a certain view of what it means to know something. It assumes that the laws of logic and mathematics are true, and science cannot verify any of these things. By the way, it shocks people to know that logic and mathematics are not known scientifically. The reason is that logic and mathematics gives us necessary truths, truths that even God couldn't make false, and they're known in a way that's called a priori. They're known without appealing to sense experience. But all scientific truths are contingent truths. That means they may be true, but there could have been a different law of gravity or something like that, and we know them through sense experience. Well, if science can be no better than the strength of the assumptions on which it rests, and if those assumptions are themselves philosophical, and every single one of them is now under attack at the university, and the task of defending these assumptions is a task of philosophy, well, then scientism is an enemy of science, because it leaves science vulnerable, and it then causes people to say, well, science may work, but that doesn't mean it's true. The other thing, if I have a few more minutes here, is that things that we know with greater certainty outside science than we do inside science. Let me give you an illustration that I use in the book. Last 3 years, I've struggled with 3 different kinds of cancers. I've had 7 surgeries, chemo, radiation, you name it, I've had it. I was in the hospital after my colon cancer surgery for 9 days. And I had different nurses. One nurse came in and was taking care of me, and she said, well, tell me, what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I'm a philosophy professor. Oh, well, that's interesting. How did that happen? I said, well, I was an undergraduate physical chemistry major, and then I went into theology and did a graduate degree, and then I did my PhD in philosophy. And she had an odd look on her face. And I said, let me tell you what I believe you're thinking, and then you can tell me whether I'm right or not. I think you're thinking, gosh, you started off in chemistry where you deal with real hard facts and truth, and you can actually know whether you're right. And for some reason, you went into theology and philosophy, which is just a shuffling of personal feelings and opinions, and nobody can really know whether they're right or not. And she looked at me, and I kid you not, she said, that's exactly what I was thinking. And I said, well, do you know that there are some things in ethics that I know with greater certainty than I know that electrons exist? And she said, you're pulling my leg. And I said, no, for example, the statement torturing little babies for fun of it is something I know with greater certainty than I know that there are such things as electrons. And she said, well, can you back that up? And I said, yeah. Do you know anything about the history of the electron? No. Well, I said, if you study the history of the electron from German wave theorists to J.J. Thomson, who is a particle theorist about electrons in Britain, all the way through electrons as they were understood in light of the ether, up to the Bohr electron, up to the quantum electron, you will discover that the idea of what an electron is has changed dramatically in the last few hundred years. So now, we no longer believe that Thomsonian electrons exist. We no longer believe that Bohr electrons exist. So now here's the problem. We now believe in the quantum electron. Well, why would it not make sense to say that 50 years from now, new evidence will come in and we will no longer believe there's any such thing as a quantum electron? So when you say, do electrons exist and do you know that, I'm going to say, which one do you mean? And you probably mean the most recent one, quantum electrons. Now, I think they probably exist, but I wouldn't be irrational to say that in 50 years we might find evidence that will overturn that. I cannot imagine any kind of evidence that we could discover in 50 years that would overturn my knowledge that torturing little babies for fun of it's wrong. I can imagine culture getting to the point where people no longer believe that tragically, but I'm talking about discovering evidence that would show that's irrational. I can't imagine what it would be. So I have greater certainty that the ethical claim is true than that there are electrons. Well, I mean, I'm glad that she wasn't giving me my medicine that morning because I'm not sure what she would have given me. But that's the problem with scientism. It's self-refuting. It does not allow for the stating and the defending of the assumptions of science, and that it does not allow for the fact that there are things that we know outside of science, and sometimes with greater certainty than some of the things we know in science.
And you know, I'm taking some notes here, and for those that are following along here, watching the video, or if you're listening online, I want to encourage you, get a pen, get a piece of paper, and take some notes because this is some excellent material to help us. So, Dr. Moreland, number 2 there, you talked about it can't defend the assumptions that it has, and you listed a few of those, but just for my own notes' sake, could we run through some of those assumptions that scientism has?
Sure. Well, just to let our viewers know, I have basically virtually a whole chapter on this in the book on Scientism and Secularism. So I can't go over all of them here, but one of them is that the laws of logic and truth and mathematics are true. So 2 and 2 is actually 4. If P, then Q and P, therefore Q. Second, that the laws of logic and mathematics are not only true, they apply to reality. Some have argued that it's an absolute miracle that a formula a guy develops in his study can take it outside in the world and it actually describes reality. Another one is that our minds and our senses give us reliable information about the world, including information about the world's deep structure. And that means its structure beyond observations. If evolution is how we got our minds and our senses, then you might argue that it would be able to give us information about what we see and hear and so on, because that would help us with survival value. But there's absolutely no reason why our minds would have the ability to penetrate to these deep underlying laws of nature that describe things that can't be seen, like quantum theory and subatomic particle theory. And that's an assumption that science makes that it can't justify. That truth is a correspondence with reality, that there is such a thing as truth, and it actually assumes certain values that they take to be objectively true. For example, report your test results honestly and don't cheat when you tell people what you've discovered. Science could not work if that moral value was not followed. But science can't justify that value. Now, I'm sorry here, Kurt. I'm just asserting these right now, but I don't have time to defend all these. But in the book, I make them even clearer and I defend them. So I want your viewers to know I'm not just blowing hot air here.
Yeah.
These are actually part of the literature in this field, and I try to make this clear so a layperson can understand it.
Yeah, certainly. And we are going to put up a link to the book so people can go ahead and purchase that on our website, just to make it convenient for anyone who wants to purchase the book. We'll give you the Amazon link there too. While you're at our website, you can subscribe too, so you never miss an episode that we bring to you week after week. Dr. Moreland, we've got to head to a short break here, but when we come back, we're going to keep talking about scientism. I've got a few more questions for you, and then I've solicited questions from our followers online, and we've got a number of questions that came in. And as I mentioned to you before we started the program, some of the questions are a bit more technical, but we're going to take the time and sort of flesh out what some of those big terms might mean, and then to hear Dr. Moreland's response. So be sure to stick with us through this about 90-second break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Have you heard of the Google Ad Grant for nonprofits? 501c3 nonprofit organizations can receive $10,000 per month in online advertising credit from Google, empowering you to share your message with the world. At Defenders Media, we partnered with Nonprofit Megaphone, an agency focused solely on Google Grant acquisition and management. They got us approved for the grant and now manage ad campaigns, bringing hundreds of new people to our websites each month. If you are eligible, Nonprofit Megaphone will acquire and manage the grant for you for a month for free to see if they can help you too. Visit nonprofitmegaphone.com to learn more. Thanks for sticking with us. through that short break from our sponsors. If you want to learn how you can become a sponsor or just one of our patrons, you can go to our website, veracityhill.com, and click on that patron tab. We would love to get your monthly support as we continue growing this vodcast ministry. Originally, we started out as just a podcast, just doing audio. Chris, it was out of my house, actually, for a few of those episodes, right out of that bedroom, and then we moved into the Defenders Media office here, and then we slowly increased. It's great. You can go back and watch some of our old episodes, and you can see how we've grown in our production and the quality, and we couldn't do it without supporters like you, so we would love to get your recurring support. Okay, on today's program, I'm joined by Dr. J.P. Moreland at Talbot School of Theology, located at Biola University. Now, J.P., before we continue our discussion, we do a short segment on our show called Rapid Questions, where we ask sort of fun, goofy questions. We get to know a little bit more about you, and I intentionally, don't warn our guests about this just so we can get, good old genuine answers. So we're going to put 60 seconds on the game clock here. And for those that have been following along, we've had a list of questions we've used time and time again. I've actually printed up a bunch more of questions. So we've got some new, fresh questions.
God have mercy on me.
Okay, so I'll start the game clock. I'll ask some of our recognizable questions for those that follow along, and then we'll hit up some new ones. So are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. And here we go. Taco Bell or KFC?
KFC.
What's your favorite TV show?
Dateline NBC.
Do you drink Dr. Pepper?
No. I love it, but just don't drink it.
Okay, good. I'll take it. Let's see. What's on the walls of the room you are in?
Pictures of my grandchildren and of Europe, where we went to Europe.
Would you ever consider living abroad?
No.
What's the last thing you purchased?
Some trail mix.
Are you a good cook?
Absolutely not.
Are you a morning bird or a night owl?
A morning bird.
If you had a big win in the lottery, how long would you wait until you tell people?
I would tell them within 30 seconds.
What kind of car do you drive?
I drive an old Honda Civic.
Okay, nice. Thank you for playing that round of rapid questions.
I'm glad I made it.
So Honda, that's the brand of car that the disciples drove, because they were of one accord. They drove a Honda Accord, of course. Cheesy dad joke there. All right, nice. So let me ask you, you've got pictures of your travels in Europe, and where have you been in Europe?
Well, I've been all over Italy and Greece. I've been in Scotland and the UK, and England, rather, and I've been to Paris and to Strasbourg, France. Okay,
very nice. I had a wonderful opportunity to live in England for a year, and so during that time, my wife and I got to travel, which was great.
What a privilege.
What was that?
What a privilege.
Yes, it was. And it's really convenient. Once you can get across the pond, as they say, the travel is not all that expensive to get from place to place. So things are smaller than you think they are over there. All right. Well, let's get back to today's topic. We are talking about scientism, what it is, how it's affected our society, and what some of its shortcomings are. And before the break, we were talking about some of these assumptions that are held within that framework of view. So how would someone sympathetic to scientism handle, this is one example you bring up in your book, how would someone sympathetic to scientism handle the issue of consciousness?
Well, that's the problem is, and I have an entire chapter in the book on this question. It is starting to be acknowledged by atheist philosophers that if consciousness is real, and by that I mean if it's the way we know it is from the first person perspective, so a pain is something that hurts and throbs, and so on. If consciousness is really real, there will be no scientific explanation for it, especially no Darwinian explanation. And Colin McGinn, who's one of the leading philosophers of mind and an atheist, said that Darwinian theory will never explain the origin of consciousness, and here's why. Darwinian theory explains things combinatorially. Now that's a $1.98 word. That means that it explains things by the rearrangement of parts due to mutation and natural selection to explain more complicated arrangements of parts. So it is really good at explaining the origin of the brain or the body, because the brain and the body is a certain arrangement of parts. It's different than the arrangement of the parts of a dog, let's say. The problem is conscious states, like a feeling of pain, are not made up of parts in a structure. A pain is just a simple quality of hurtfulness. So that Darwinism and scientific explanation in general is the wrong kind of explanation to explain the origin of consciousness. And if consciousness is real, then there'd have to be an extra scientific explanation, and one would be a theistic explanation, because you start with consciousness. If you say in the beginning was the Logos, then you've got an explanation for mind. If you say in the beginning were the particles, and your story is just a history of the rearrangement of the particles, you're going to end up with rearranged particles, not consciousness, because that's getting something from nothing. So how do advocates of scientism deal with this? They try to reduce consciousness to brain states or to something physical so they don't have to deal with it. And so they've got a bunch of reductive attempts to say, well, consciousness really is nothing but the activity of the brain or so on. But that has not worked, and it hasn't worked for 80 years since it was begun in the 1930s. And so now more and more advocates of scientism are trying to say, well, consciousness just emerges when matter reaches the right level of complexity. But the problem is that's just a name for the problem. It's not a solution. The question is, how could it emerge from consciousness matter?
What is, you said they're advocates of scientism, and I've kind of called them scientismists. Is that, what do you refer to someone who affirms scientism?
Well, up until now, I've said advocates of scientism, but I think we ought to stipulate scientismists and use that from now on, because you've just I like your stipulative definition. Let's refer to them as scientismists from now on.
All right, that works for me. Scientismists. Chris, make a note. We're going to get this trademarked. All right, so in your book, you also lay out how scientism is an enemy of the sciences when you really think about it. So how is that the case? If those that think the hard sciences are the only way to truth, they're not just the final arbiter, but the sole arbiter of truth, how is it that that's really in conflict with the mission of scientific inquiry?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think we've already hinted at it, and that is that there is simply no way for science to defend its assumptions. And therefore, it kind of leaves science floating in midair without being grounded in the assumptions it makes. So to put it differently, if you're a scientismist, then you just have to blind faithfully postulate the assumptions of science and then say we're going to do science, but it's based on blind faith. Now, a lot of people might say, well, look, what difference does it make, because science does what it does, whether they can justify their assumptions or not? But that's really, I hate to say this, I don't mean to be mean-spirited, that's a very uneducated response. Because as I show in the book, there's a difference between scientific realism and scientific anti-realism. Scientific realism says that the more science advances, the closer and closer we get to approximate truth of what's out there in reality. So in this view, scientific theories are really true, or at least approximately true. And if they postulate electrons, then electrons really exist. The scientific anti-realism says, no, the purpose of science is simply to make accurate predictions and to harmonize with our observations. Or to put it differently, scientific theories work. But because they work, that doesn't mean they're true. And they can show a whole line of hundreds of theories in the history of science that worked. That is, they helped generate technology, they made useful predictions, and so on. But later they were found out to be completely false. So a person who says, well, look, we don't need to worry about this mumbo-jumbo about the assumptions of science. Science can get along nicely all on its own, after all. Thank you very much. Well, no, it can't, because you can't now claim that scientific theories give us the truth about reality, because there's an equally plausible rival theory that says, no, scientific theories are really helpful in making predictions, but that doesn't mean they're true. So scientism is an enemy of science because it leaves science vulnerable to attack because it can't justify its own assumptions.
Or we might think here, this was one example you talked about earlier, that science assumes people are going to report their findings truthfully.
Yes.
But there is nothing in the scientific field that says one ought to do that. That's an ethical question. That's a philosophical question. So if scientism were true, then you might think it would become an enemy of science because there's no intellectual grounding, or there's no reason why someone should report their findings truthfully. And sometimes we get scenarios where scientists get in trouble for not doing that.
Exactly. And I wonder, why wouldn't the following principle be wise? Report your findings in a way that's in your best interest for your career, as long as you make it pretty likely that you're not going to get caught. Now, that seems to me to be a really reasonable rule if you're not a theist or don't believe in objective morals. So you're absolutely right about that. That's a very good illustration.
And you might even modify the language there to report one's findings for their survival of their career or something like that.
Exactly. And you know something else, Kurt? One of the ways scientism is an enemy of science is that scientists sometimes think that they can pontificate about everything, and they make claims about things that are not scientific, and they end up looking like fools. Richard Dawkins is a classic example. He raises the problem, well, who designed the designer? And as though that's some big, heavy problem no Christians ever thought of. That was solved 1,600 years ago. Now, when he said that, he just makes himself look like an idiot. Again, he was on Fox News, and a reporter asked him, well, can you explain where the universe came from? Where did all this come from? And Dawkins said, we're working on it. Well, what he didn't realize is that science will never be able to explain where the origin of the universe. Why? Well, in my book, I demonstrate very clearly that science can't start explaining anything until it's already got a universe to use in its explanation. So it explains one part of the universe, water, by appealing to another part of the universe, hydrogen, oxygen, and the laws of chemistry. It therefore can't explain the origin of the very thing it needs to assume before it can start explaining. Well, when Dawkins makes a statement like that, people who know something just go, man, that guy's a goofball. So it just discredits him. And so in scientism and secularism, I just lay out things people can teach their kids or teach in Sunday school or say on the street that will help them defeat this dangerous ideology.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to get your free copy of the book, all you have to do is share this video and comment on our video stream here on Facebook, and you'll be entered to win. We're going to select one winner at random to get a free copy of the book Compliments of Crossway Books. Dr. Moreland, my last question to you before we go to some of the Q&A from some of our followers. How should Christians move forward in welcoming the advancement of science? So in our society today, there are some people that they really are anti-science. They view this, they pit religion versus science, and some people want to side with religion more so than, so-called science, whatever that might mean. But what are ways that Christians can welcome scientific inquiry and findings?
Well, science is a gift of God to us, and the entire history of science has by and large has involved Christians who've been working in the scientists. Think of all the things that science has discovered that's made our lives so much more wonderful. Medicine. I like air conditioning. Things of that sort. So I celebrate science, and I wish more of our young people would go into science. I just want to make clear that there's a difference between celebrating the gift of science and distorting the ugly philosophical view of scientism.
Mm-hmm. Good. And for those that are interested in thinking more of the ways that Christianity and science are compatible and sort of speak to one another, I did a great interview with Fuzz Rana, I think about a year or so ago, of Reasons to Believe, where we chatted about those issues. So that would be, I'm not sure which episode that would be, but you can go through our website and check our listings there. All right, now we have solicited questions from our followers, and so some of these questions I think are certainly from some of your fans, because they are some more technical questions. So first here, we've got a comment from Seth. Seth writes this: Hello, Dr. Moreland. Thank you so much for all you've done for the kingdom of God. I have benefited from your work tremendously, and I pray that your new book receives the wide reading it is surely deserving of. He writes, I had a question regarding your view of abstract objects. I know you are a realist concerning abstracta, so I was wondering what your view is on their relationship to God. So first, before you answer, maybe we could talk about what does Seth here mean when he talks about abstract objects, and then what does it mean to be a realist?
Well, an abstract object would be something that exists outside of space and time, like the number 2, or the color red, or brownness, circularity, and things of that sort. Now, for a whole bunch of reasons, I think that these things exist. They're properties or attributes. So attributes or properties that we use NESS, like brownness or painfulness and that sort of thing, are abstract objects. The problem for Christians is that they seem to be necessary beings. They don't seem to have come into existence and perished. So how did God create them? And did he create his own attributes? And my view is that God creates abstract objects in the sense that he necessarily sustains them in existence. He doesn't bring them into existence because that's like creating a square circle. You can't bring something into existence that is not in time. But God still creates them in the sense that he is the sustainer of them in existence. Now, what about his own properties? Does he sustain them in existence? Well, no, because that means he would have to have the properties before he could sustain them. When it comes to God's own attributes, like the property of being all-powerful or all-loving and that sort of thing, I believe that these are abstract objects that God simply finds himself possessing, so that God does not create his own attributes, but he does sustain necessarily in existence other abstract objects.
We have a follow-up from someone following on our live stream right now, David. He asks, how does the color red exist before it's created? He says, I'm confused with this, though I'm sure about laws of logic and numbers. So how would, say, a color exist?
Well, don't think the color red is a wavelength of light, please, because wavelength of light vibrate and the color red doesn't. It's a simple quality, not the same thing. They may go together. Okay, redness exists before anything has it. So you have to distinguish between redness itself and a red object, something having the color of red. I'm saying that properties can exist without something having to have them. And so before there was a color red, or take some modern color that humans have caused to be instantiated, I don't know enough about it, but those colors didn't come into existence in 2005 when the first object had it. They existed timelessly. Doesn't make any sense to say redness came into existence. It makes sense to say that for the first time an object had redness or instantiated redness. So that's what I think. And the instantiation of redness is in space and time. It's right there on the Apple surface over at the table.
Okay, all right. I know that can be a bit technical for folks. Maybe we'll take something a little bit easier here. This question is from another viewer, Kyle. He writes, how deeply should we expect lay Christians to be able to respond to such complex epistemological issues? How much should we emphasize that lay Christians trust those in the church with expertise?
I really like this question. I think that lay Christians should do a little bit better job than they are now. So they all should read one or two simple apologetics books, and I'm not just stroking you here, but they ought to listen to podcasts like this and go to websites where there are answers to questions, and that's good enough. But what they have to do is value that this is being done. And that's what we don't have today. So the lay Christian may say, well, I can do it a little bit, but boy, I'm sure glad that we have people that do this. Thus, every local church ought to identify people in the church who have a passion for apologetics. When I pastored, we did that. And we bought them books to read. We had some that liked ethics, others liked science and Christianity, and others liked arguments for God. And we had to become pretty decent experts on those questions. And we told the people in the church, if your kid gets asked a question, or if you get asked a question you can't answer, say, I don't know the answer to that, but I know somebody in the church that does. Would you like to have lunch next week with my friend? And that's what you do. Now, with real tough questions, it's good to know that we've got scholars in the academy that know these issues and can go toe-to-toe and deal with them in the professional journals and so on. So at that point, what a lay person could do would be to say, oh, dude, that's way over my head, but I'll tell you, we have people, and give a couple of names, but we've got people that are professional scholars who know how to deal with those questions. I would refer you to them because that's above my pay grade.
Yeah, and even if the layperson didn't know about the scholars, they would know the apologist, who would hopefully know who these scholars are.
Yeah, it goes up the chain. That's absolutely right. Yeah. We all have a role to play, don't we?
Yes, that's right. Yep. Great. Okay, next question comes from Cameron. Do you think belief in God can be rational without arguments?
Yes. I think belief in God can be rational based on experience without an argument. For example, when a person looks at the created world, they could intuitively grasp that it is designed and needs a designer without having to have an argument. My mom and dad were blue-collar workers. They couldn't give a design argument if their life depended on it. But when they experienced a number of things in nature, they just saw these things and they immediately were able to grasp, good grief. This couldn't have happened by chance. This had to be designed. It was based on an experiential intuition. I think that kind of thing, all this had to come from somewhere. Or, man, I don't know about you, but I know that there are right and wrong. And I know that had to come from somewhere. Those are intuitions based upon experiencing the moral law or design or something like that.
Lucas here.
I don't agree with Alvin Plantinga's view, though, that belief in God is properly basic.
Okay, that's a good distinction, and maybe there might be some follow-up there.
Yes.
Okay, so Lucas here asks a very important question. How can one acquire a copy of the Blackwell Companion to Substance Dualism without having to take out a second mortgage?
That book is an absolute must for people that are interested in the subject. And so I would say wait for the paperback. There will be a paperback that will eventually come out, and when it does, get it. Just like the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology required a second mortgage, and you got it there.
Up on top of my shelf, yep.
What, did you get the hardback or the paperback?
You know, I actually did get the hardback.
You know that. What were you thinking about?
The hardbacks, they last a long time. I mean,
well, there you go, dude. All right. But wait for the paperback.
Yeah, and if you can't afford the paperback either, I'm sure a local library has it, and you can check out some of those books. And of course, local libraries can be very helpful. If they don't have it, they'll figure out a way to acquire it for you, whether it's purchasing it or through some network. So, good question, Lucas. Tim asks here, what do you think of the growth in the last decades of the charismatic intellectuals and their future? It seems like much of what you urged in Kingdom Triangle about being less concerned with the controversial titles and more concerned to seek the person and work of the Spirit has been exactly what has happened. What do you see happening on the future?
Well, I'm very encouraged because I believe that there needs to be a combination of kingdom power and the power of the Spirit in the life of the mind. I don't see why you have to have one or the other. And I think that there is a growing number of what we might call signs and wonders intellectuals. I'm personally not charismatic. I'm what's called third wave. I don't believe in a second baptism of the Spirit, but it doesn't matter to me if people do. The point is that that's happening, and signs and wonders are multiplying like rabbits all over the world, and what they're desiring is that we send teachers to help develop thinking leadership for all the converts that are coming through signs and wonders.
And this is, for those of you who don't know you tend to, you said you've got that third wave. You go to Vineyard Anaheim, is that right? Which is
yes, and I've seen people healed, and I've been given word. Just 2 days ago, I got words of knowledge for 2 young men at a conference I never met in my life, and they both started crying because it was just what they needed to hear, and I didn't know anything about it. It was wonderful.
That's great. I'm curious to ask, you mentioned earlier on the program today about how many surgeries you've had. So here's a question for me. How is your health?
I think I'm going to make it. At this point, all my PET and CAT scans, colonoscopies and endoscopies are clear. I got a colonoscopy next Friday. But it's a good sign that after a little over 2.5 years, all are clear, so I'm optimistic.
That's great. Wow, that's wonderful news. I know you've been dealing with health issues for many years now. So
yes. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we've got. We'll make this our last technical question. So Cole, he asks, why choose substance dualism over hylomorphism? And maybe we can explain those terms.
It's hard, but by substance dualism, that is consistent with what's called hylomorphism, where hylomorphism is the view that a human being is a composite of what's called form, and that would be the form of being human, which turns out to be a soul, and matter, and which is called prime matter or And so substance
the body,
dualism,
the flesh.
Yeah, substance dualism is thought of as two substances. The body's a substance and so's the soul. I don't believe that. As a substance dualist, I believe that there is an immaterial, real self or I or ego or soul that can exist without the body. But I don't think the body is a separate substance. I think the body is an ensouled material structure that depends on the soul for its existence. If the soul is withdrawn from the body, it's not a body any longer, it's a corpse.
Okay, so
I'm closer to hylomorphism than I am Descartes.
Okay, all right, and so this is Seth has a question related here to this answer then. Where is the soul located? Is it spatially located anywhere?
Yes. The soul is to the body as God is to space. God is fully present at every point in space. The soul is fully present at each point throughout the body. That's why if you get part of your body cut off, you don't become 80% of a person. So the soul is omnipresent throughout a certain region of space, namely the region of the body, just as God is. It's called holomerism, and it's the view that Aquinas and all the medieval thinkers held, and I think it makes the best sense. I think the soul then is fully located at each point of the body. I think it also contains our genetic information, and that's what seems to be fully present throughout the body too. So that's my view.
Okay, that's really interesting because that seems to work with at least my thoughts on the intermediate state.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, but now, so I want to follow up here, and this will be my last question for you. So I hold to the minority position, the sleep state model.
I see.
And so for those that have been following the show for a long time, I think I probably mentioned that before. So the majority view is that the soul leaves the body and goes to heaven and then will come back on the day of resurrection. So with your view that there's sort of this a unified tension between the soul and the body. I don't want to say attached. Maybe you're comfortable with that language, that the soul is attached to the body. What would then that entail for the intermediate state after death?
Well, I have it the other way. I'd say the body's attached to the soul. The soul can exist without the body, but the body can't exist without the soul.
Got it.
So in my view, the soul is capable of existing, whether asleep or alive. It exists. I think conscious rather. I think it's conscious, but you still think the soul exists without the body. Mm-hmm. My view implies that as well. I don't think it emerges from the body, in which case you got a problem. I think the body is actually a dependent for its existence on the soul. Okay,
gotcha. All right, I'll have to think more about that. I'm open to changing my view on that. So that's one of those fun little things.
I have a book on it called The Soul is Why It's Real and Why It Matters.
Yes, and this is a field that you've been thinking about for many years. You've written books on it. This is one of your areas of expertise.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll have to do some more reading on that. I'm presently working on my own PhD studies, so I've got to complete that stuff before I can go off into other ventures.
Good luck to you.
Great. Dr. Moreland, thank you so much for joining us on our program today, for enlightening us about what scientism is and how it's affected our society and ways we can respond to understand its shortcomings. And we'll be sure to put a link to your book at our website, and I hope many people will check that out.
It's been my privilege, and I hope your viewers will promote your show and tell other people to watch it.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, God bless you.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, well, that does it for our show today. I am grateful for the continued support of our patrons and the partnerships that we have with our sponsors. Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, Fox Restoration, and Nonprofit Megaphone. Thank you to our technical producer today, Chris, and AJ, also keeping tabs over there. Good to see you, AJ. And a special thanks to our guest, Dr. J.P. Moreland. Before I finally sign off here, let me say next week we have J. Warner Wallace, the cold case detective. Next week's episode is going to be great. You'll want to tune in, and you just won't want to miss that interview. And last but not least here, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.